This is a recording for the CUPHAT project. My name is Matthew O'Brien. Today is the 8th of August 2023 and I have here with me Lara Harper. Thank you very much, Lara. Can you confirm for the recorder that you're happy to take part in the project?
I'm very happy.
Perfect. And could you spell your name for the recorder, please?
Yeah, L-A-R, Lara.
Harper.
Lara Harper, sorry, H-A-R-P-E-R.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lara. Could you tell me a little bit about your early life? When and where were you born, and where did you
I was born in Holles Street in Dublin, 1967. I was brought up in Kilmagig, Upper Kilmagig of Oka. Big family, 11. All very highly involved in sport, local sport and music was a big part of our life. Grandparents, Frank and Catherine Harper. Frank was born in Omagh in Northern Ireland, moved down to Wicklow in the early 20s, came down to work to run the flax mill here in Avoca, which now is the Avoca Handweavers. His wife Catherine was from the area. She was a Doolin, which was an unusual name for this area, but there was a lot of Doolins and connected family in the area. They married. They had my dad and his three brothers, one, and then had a sister. It was a great upbringing, very rural Ireland, kind of every Sunday morning, get up, get ready for Mass, have your fry up before you go, the whole family, and walk down to the village and go to Mass. On the way home, stop in the shop, father might go for a couple of pints, and then back home for lunch. And that was really, hard-working family, both my mum and my dad. My dad worked in the Avoca mines since he was young. My mum, she had numerous jobs, but she was a recognised chef. She would have taught people in Brewer Street for CERT, the Irish organisation for catering. We all kind of got involved, gravitated to the catering side. I did in the early years, went to, when I was 17, went to Switzerland, spent 3 years there serving my time as hotel management. Came back home, worked for an Irish company. They eventually moved to London. I moved to London in it was 85. Worked for Madigan's for about 12 years, and then moved back home, worked for them in Dublin, ran pubs and hotels for them in Dublin. And then when I got married, a local lady, Davenant, we moved to Auckland. We had 4 kids ourselves, got out of the catering business and went into tree surgery business. I'm a production manager with Connell's Tree Services. We do a lot of utility work. And hence I'm here in Avoca. We started up in 2017. We're heavily involved, as I say, in music. All our family. We're 4th generation. My grandfather was a flute and fife player from the north. My father was an accordion player. His brother could play multiple instruments, Kevin. He played saxophone, accordion, fiddle, tin whistle, flute. And then his brother Frankie played drums, and Noel wasn't really, that's the other brother, he wasn't a musician. He was more into being on the other side of the counter, if you know what I mean, listening to the music and having a few pints. And in 2017, in the early 60s, there was a group here in Avoca, the Avoca Kelly Band, which my uncles and my father was heavily involved in. They toured America 6 or 7 times for St. Patrick's Day. They went and done a tour, Seattle as well. Music was always in the area. We were always heavily involved. So in 2017, we wanted to kind of introduce music to the local people here in the village. And we started up a Coastal branch called the Wicklow Miners. And we're going ever since. We're going from strength to strength. We're participating in the All Ireland this coming week in Mullingar. and we have a good few members involved. So we're excited about that, and that's us up to present. Yeah.
I mean, we might pick up on some of the kind of music elements a little bit later, but to go back to your kind of very childhood memories, what are the kind of ones that stand out to you? I know you mentioned about going to mass.
Yeah, it was a big thing. Community was a big thing. Community, this small village, everybody knew everybody, and like I yearned for the place when I was away. I just loved it. Growing up in Avoca, we used to do simple little things together, like we made a little football field down underneath our house, and all our summers were playing Gaelic football, hurling, just in general, maybe getting on a bicycle going to Glendalough from the village, maybe 5 or 6 of our mates going up the road to Glendalough, and maybe go for a walk up the forest. We used to do pheasant beating down in Ballyarter. They had the pheasant shoots there in the winter. We participated in that, and just it was a happy upbringing, you know. Really loved. Glad we're from Avoca, and actually when I moved home, my wife and myself said, like, there's only 2 places we want to live, either Auckland or Avoca, either one. We couldn't get a site in Avoca, we moved to Auckland, and that's where we it was very hard. And when we came home was 97, I think it was, from England. She studied in England as well, so when we came home, we just couldn't wait to get home, to be honest. It was always a long-term plan, was to come back home, you know. And
when you came back home, had you noticed any changes in that?
Yeah, in a big way. I found that, you know, I suppose families were kind of, a lot of people went away from home, and it would have affected the local area. Like people I know that have friends of mine that have moved away to the States, have never returned. So a lot of people my age group, I wouldn't see them very often now. So I think 85, 86, there was a lot of people heading away, and I think it did affect the local area really. And then the mines closed in 82, and there was a lot of people, you know, it was a massive employment how would you say, it was a massive kind of hub for employment, and that affected the area as well. There wasn't much employment. Then in Arklow, there was a lot of kind of businesses where they were getting these tax incentives for the 7-year, and then they were moving out of the area. So there was a lot of people affected by it. Now, it's changed again. I can see a kind of a change in the culture. There's a lot of people from Dublin moving into the area. The area stretched out a bit, a lot more housing developments, and that, like, it's when I was here, there was only maybe 500 or 600 people. It's now, I think it's gone up to 1,700 actually in the local area. So, and Avoca probably would be the biggest parish in this area. I think there's 4 churches. I think Ballycoog, Barniski, Temple Rainey, and Avoca. And that's what it's the biggest parish in probably the Leinster area. Again, it was a kind of area that when anybody came in, we had a sergeant that moved into the area, and I think it was around 78 or so, and he was a big influence on the area where it comes to sport. He was from Tipperary, Sergeant O'Rourke. Would have kept a lot of youngsters busy playing sport and that. Fond memories then, I have to say, in Wicklow and in Avoca. We all would have represented probably Wicklow in some stage in the sport. Very proud. Maybe Wicklow wasn't what you call the most dominant in sport, but it was, again, great joy to play, like, and to be involved.
Does that go back to your kind of school days?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, we had a very actually in this old school here in Avoca, we would have had a headmaster, and he was very proactive in sport and in music. Most of the time we would be all playing music during our break or whatever, or playing sport. He would get involved. Mr. Gallagher, I think he's retired. Can't remember when he's retired, but he's still alive and still going strong, and we see him the odd time. But yeah, very, as I say, it was very good in those days. We had a priest here in the area as well, Father Byrne. He was originally from Greenland, Paddy Byrne, and great man. He used to have youth club, and that's something I'd say the area could do with. In the early days, say in the 80s, there was youth clubs, which was a big kind of hub for kids to go, keep them off the streets. We used to go camping around the country. Might go, say, a year to Galway, another year to Kerry, and it was a constant community orientated gathering, and it's just fond memories of those days. You know, get involved. We used to have a sports day. I don't know whether the sports day is still going, but we used to all love our sports day, and it just was typical rural Ireland, and it was great. Yeah.
And what kind of, I mean, you mentioned the pub earlier on a Sunday. What other kind of services or facilities were in the area when you were growing up?
Well, yeah, you had in Avoca, you had two pubs. You had the Fountain, which is now Fitzgerald's, where Ballycaz Angel was filmed. You had across the road Eamon Andrews, who was the boxing commentator. Noel actually was a boxing commentator as well. He had a local pub. He retired and moved to Clare Galway border. His family is still, some of them they're not living in the area, but still keep in touch with some of the locals. Again, Noel was a great man for the kind of stories and, you know, of old times and that. Fitzgerald's pub, which was the Fountain years ago, was a great gathering for music. Used to be a lot of music there. I remember my father talking about in the early days they had a thing called the Melody Fair, which goes back to the 50s, 60s and 70s as far as I know. And then Peter Moore, who's now deceased, Peter was a local man from Cronebain. Peter bought the Meetings of the Waters, the pub, and Peter started back the Melody Fair in I think it was 2000 or 2002. Went on for a few years, but then it died off. But that was a great thing, because they used to do kind of displays or talks on the old mines and stuff like that. And what was the connection with the mines and the music, and why was music so prominent in this area, going back to the mines. And that's my grandfather actually, when he moved down, they really would have they started up the first flute and fife band, and it's the Tigroni flute and fife band. Well, it was the Avoca Mines, really. It was all connected, and there was members from the mines that all participated in the group. Like, they were all members of the group, and I actually have a picture that I can send on for the archive with the names and all on them. And that was, I think the photograph was taken in the 1930s. So it all had a big kind of a connection with Avoca and Cunry and the mines and that. And
I know it's the mines closed in 1982.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about maybe the significance of the mines, or even if it goes back in your family, if there were stories about the mines?
Well, yeah. So we, as I say, my father and a couple of his siblings worked in the mines, and then a lot of local people. You could ask, I'd say majority of the families here in this area, somebody from their family worked in the mines. And as I say, when it closed in 82, it had a huge impact on the area. You know, it was like it was the end of the world, because most people relied, it was an income. Now, be that my brother wanted to serve his time in the mines, my father wouldn't allow it, because the conditions in the early days were very hard. And I've heard of a good few disasters within the mines and fatalities and that. But again, in the early days, a lot of the local people kind of, a lot of conversation was around the mines. And again, they used to have, you know, ex-servicemen that were all members of the mines. They used to have a group that used to go do tours of different mines all over, Tara mines, Castlecomer, any of the mines in the country. And they used to do kind of tour weekends away, and it was great. I went on a couple actually. Yeah, when I used to come home on my holidays, I used to go with my father and that. But I just think a lot of local people had fond memories in those days, you know. I remember as well, there was a local lady, Mrs. Barry, lived up the road here. Her husband Jim, who was originally a Kilkenny man, moved to the area. He was a manager in the hand weavers, but I used to clean with her. I used to pal around with her son. We used to go to the mines offices and clean, just to help her clean. Like. But it was a bit just to see what was in there. All the archaeology part of it, we used to love going in and seeing all these old rocks and stuff. So yeah, it was interesting stuff, you know. And I remember as well, we used to have a day out once a year they used to bring the families over to the mines and show them, you know, machinery and stuff like that. So it was, you know, it was great. Yeah, I remember as well when my father forget his lunch. My mum would see his lunch bag and she'd say, "You better go over," and we'd cycle over to the mines and wait for him to come up, get his lunch bag, and just great memories, like. Yeah.
And you mentioned as well the hand weavers and the connection, your familiar connection with that as well.
Yeah, so it was called a flax mill in the early days. This is going back in the 20s. But the original mill and all is there, like. But I remember my grandfather came down from the north because they're heavily involved in the north in the wool trade. So he came down. I suppose he came down to get away. Troubles really started in those days, and he wasn't into all that you know, cross border trouble and that. So he moved down and was heavily involved in the flax mill. And again, my dad would have done a bit. My uncle Frankie was probably. He was a weaver, so that was his trade for years. And when he died, actually, I see he had one of the looms in the back of his house still there, I think. His family kept it, you know. But yeah, he was one. Now it's kind of that art is dying out. It's more machinery now, where his was a hand loom, like. Yeah, and my grandfather served his time there, and it was, again, he originally. The hand weavers, I think they only employed something like 10 or 12 people. But then it really got popular in say, the 50s and 60s. American tourists coming over really loved the natural garments and that. And to this day now, it's a great name abroad, the Avoca hand weavers. I think in the 80s and 90s, a family called the Pratts bought it. And they really brought it to a new level, like international recognition, and it's still there. So yeah.
And so there's a great pride in the vote.
Oh, it's great pride because any of the products out of it were of top quality, like. Yeah.
And you mentioned as well the kind of music connection with the miners, and that obviously you've then embraced that name.
Yeah, well, see, the only thing with the name, we called it the Wicklow Miners, and the reason why we called it rather than the Avoca Miners, we didn't want to exclude people from outside the area. So we said, consciously, we'd call it the Wicklow Miners, because there was a lot of people from Wicklow and outside of Wicklow, Wexford, there was even people from Dublin worked in the mines. So it was to kind of embrace the whole area rather than just Avoca, and we're conscious about that. And the reason why we wanted to connect something with the music in the area, and the two things that connected was the mines and the local musicians.
And were there any particular miners' songs or pieces of music?
Yeah, there was a couple of tunes that were called. I think there was a hornpipe called Wicklow, the Miners of Wicklow, and there was other. I think Billy Byrne. For Ballymanus. Ballymanus is just outside of Avoca, heading for Asna Gap, which is up Ratdangan. So I don't know whether there was a connection with Billy Byrne, but a lot of those were tunes that were played by the locals. There probably is other tunes. I'd have to research it more, but I know we played the Miners of Wicklow. So it's a kind of, and it's been recorded quite a bit by well-known musicians. There was actually it's an interesting thing we did during COVID. We did a Flat Fest. Every county was asked to participate and do, I think it was something like an hour's worth of interviews with all the local branches in Wicklow, and provide some of the archive and stuff that was connected with him, because in the early 50s and 60s there was a lot of archiving done for local areas, and we then added to that, and there was a video put out for each area to celebrate the different counties, and I suppose it was fitting for the time of COVID that nobody could do anything other than in their own homes, so we all got involved in that, and there was a few people that were heavily involved in the early days of Cultus, the creation of Cultus, would have spoke on behalf of the county, which are still alive, and we still are heavily involved. They come into a lot of when we're having recitals and stuff like that. So in the early 1920s, 30s, there was the local flute and fife band, which my grandfather was involved. All of those were members of the mines. Their kids would have got involved, and they started in the 1960s. They started a branch. It didn't last long. Then they also had what they call a marching band, and that was mostly people from the local primary school. Again, I have photographs that I can give you with pictures of I think it was 1966, and it was great to see because some of my relations were in it. So it was lovely to see that. And then, as I say, we started in 2017. We said, look, the area needs to there's great music in Wicklow. We need to highlight it, and we need to make it something to do with the Avoca mines and that, bring it back. So that's when we started our local branch, and it's gone on strength to strength. It will probably increase again this year because of the amount of time. There's a lot of inquiries from people wanting to know can their kids, and that's the other thing in Wicklow. A lot of the other branches, Wicklow start at 8, but we decided consciously we need to start them at 5 years of age, because then you're connecting with the primary school and getting them early, and by that stage, by 8 and 9, they're hooked on the traditional music, and it's keeping the heritage alive.
And do you think that's something that's kind of almost infectious in Avoca, because you're saying that the pubs are, happy to host these kind of music events?
Yeah. I just think it's something that whenever we had the FLA this year in Wicklow. Avoca has hosted for the first time, and it was a big event here, and all the local businesses got heavily involved, and because it's a small village, it was kind of a daunting thing to take on. But we said, we'll give it a go, we'll see how it. But we were so pleased that the local area, all the pubs, local people promoted it. Our local tidy towns got involved, the post office, everything to do with the IT centre, everybody got heavily involved, the chemist, and it was just lovely to see. It kind of brought back memories of the early days in Avoca, and I think rural Ireland needs to come back. I think people are coming home, and we had relations from America that came home to listen because they knew it was the first time that it was hosted in Avoca. So they were blown away by the standard and that, and it was a huge success. So I think we're going to go strength to strength. Wicklow's hosting the Leinster FLA in 2024. So again, that's another thing that will push on music in Wicklow. So yeah.
And do you have any particular favourite song or verse, or is there anything that has particular meaning for your family, maybe?
Yeah, no, just in the early days when we played sessions, we would have played a lot of. We were heavily influenced by Scottish music because my grandfather was from the north, so they would be very influenced by Irish Scots music, that kind of Donegal style and Northern Ireland style, and I suppose that my kids have incorporated that a bit with our local traditional music. So yeah, I would say a lot of kind of Scots, Irish, and then you would have a lot of kind of Wexford music that we would be highly involved with, because we don't have our own groups. Actually this year we had one under 10 group in it. It's the first group that we've ever produced from the branch because we're only a very new branch. but we play a lot in Tushgard, which is Crown Fort on the border of Wicklow, because they'd be the closest to us. And we would be influenced by a lot of kind of Wexford music. There was a composer, Tom Kinsley. Tom was from, I think it's Tara Hill out, Ballymoney out, kind of on the border again of Arklow, Gorey, and he would have wrote a lot of marches, the Tom Kinsley March. We would play that quite a bit. We'd play, as I say, Scotch kind of Highlands and that. So yeah, and a lot of people, I know in Irish circles, you're not really allowed to perform Scots music in the Irish, in the All Ireland. That I can understand it, but again, you can hear some of the influences there. So there's a bit of that as well, you know.
It might be a difficult question, but how would you characterise Wexford music?
Wexford music would be very traditional. Very, I would say, would be one of the most traditional out of. If you go to Clare, it's got more modern. Wexford have kept the old style, like the old accordion styles. You can hear it because whenever anybody talks to ours or listen to them in a session, they'd say, "Geez, you've got a very Wexford style," you know. And you can hear the different styles. Now, I personally like Wexford style. I like Wicklow style, but I really, really like Donegal style. I just love the northern style of music. I just think it's fabulous. Like,
would there be a similarity between Wicklow and Wexford style?
Yeah, very much. Yeah. We'd be kind of influenced by them as well. Like, yeah.
Very good. Yeah. And I'm just curious, have you or your family ever kind of had an interest in local history or local places or people? I know obviously the mines.
Yeah, no, my dad was heavily involved. He would have done talks, the odd interview. Now the mines was always bringing it back to the mines, but like stuff like my dad. I think it was in the 50s. He moved to Liscannor to work down in Dublin, and Liscannor down there. He worked doing the slabs, and just little stories. My uncles were big into motorbikes, so they would. He played in bands down there as well, and played down in O'Connor's down in Doolin. So again, that's where the Clare traditional music connection came in. But he worked down in Liscannor, and the stories would tell about, you know, doing stuff. The drive from here down there. Imagine that, like driving on a motorbike down to Clare. And in those days, it used to be like they were dressed 3-piece suits. You know, everything was so affordable. Money wasn't plentiful, but stuff was like going back to the early days. My dad was saying you could buy a suit for like in nowadays for 20 pence, like a tweed suit. But my uncles used to get on the motorbikes in Britain. He used to have these white shirts. My grandmother used to starch the shirts, and when they were playing in the bands, they were impeccable. Like the dress code was fantastic. Like, and just Dad talking about. He used to do grave digging as well, like simple little things like for their neighbours. Say a neighbour's dad died, they used to dig graves. You know, they were very connected to the area. I remember him saying Barniski graveyard isn't that much used anymore, but he would have dug graves, and a few friends that died young, I know, would be buried there. But just in general, I remember as well in the 80s, or even in 75 maybe to 85, we used to have heavy snow here in this area, and we used to walk to our grandmother who lived up in Tigroni, which is up near Cunry, and you couldn't get any, like you just have to get the army helicopters in to drop food and stuff. But we used to walk there, and it was a big thing, walking with your dad and your mum up to your grandmother's to bring food and that. It's just, you know, great memories like in those early days. And things were so simple, you know. There was no cars. Not every family had a motor car. My mum knew how to drive. My dad didn't. He drove motorbikes, but never a motor car. My mum didn't have one because there was 11 in the family and money wasn't plentiful, but we never wanted for anything. They were both hard workers. And again, most people in the area were, you know, their families were really hard working parents, and you kind of keep that ethos. And same, I've tried to do the same with my own kids, you know, and we all work, and we don't want for anything, and that's because of the kind of upbringing that we had from our parents, you know.
And aside from kind of musical celebrations or events, are there any other kind of celebrations or events that happen in Avoca or in the surrounding areas?
Yeah, well, we would have had we'd always celebrate the Marion year. That was because there was a few disasters in the mines, and to have the shrine over at the mine, Our Lady, and there would have been a lot of tours to Kilpatrick, and they used to do the walks there, and I'd say the O&E we used to do, but more so we used to do the Sunday mornings was always a big thing, going to Mass, and then Good Friday was a big day. Good Friday was always a family day off, family together. But yeah, most of our time was just being together, you know, as a family. Like even though I mightn't see all my family, I mightn't see them for months because of work and that commitment, but still you're there when you come together. We would always have a Christmas celebration. Family was always a big thing. We always had a tradition that we go down to our parents, even if we were married with our own kids. We'd all go down when our parents were alive, and that was a big part of it as well. What else was a kind of celebration? St. Patrick's Day was always huge. Yeah, it was always huge. And then just any other bank holidays, there was always something going on. And I remember as well, we used to do the parades. Parade was, and it's still a big community thing. Like, you have the parade, and we'd always have a kind of a ritual. So you get up on St. Patrick's Day, you go to Mass. We'd usually play in the church. It was always a tradition. You then go to one of the parades, say Rathdrum first, then you go to Archaeological, and now they started one in Ockram, because we live in Ockram. We have a parade in Ockram. Then we'd always go over, especially in Ockram, we'd always go over to the pavilion, and we have an open kind of session there, outdoor, and all the people come and sit around. And again, I think it's a great thing. It brings community together. Then we just go our separate ways, and then always that evening we'd have a session in a local pub, and it's a great day. It's kind of the one day that all family can get together, and that still goes on. Then we'd always have a great tradition as well. My father was a firm believer. It was a great Halloween. There was a tradition years ago that you dress up and you go play music in all the different pubs, and the people saying, "Who are they now? And who are they?" Because in this area there's a lot of families. You'd have local families like the Canavan family, Mark's, and then Mark's own was great musicians as well. Again, all those families would get together, and you'd always have Paddy's Day, Halloween, Christmas, any of the bank holidays, and they were all big days. Like, it was just that kind of thing. I think most rural Ireland would be the same. They'd have the same traditions, you know.
And would you have had a favourite tradition?
Yeah, I always thought the Halloween, I loved it. Just, we used to dress up, and you could hear people saying, and we used to collect money for charity as well, for local charities and that, hospice and different things. We used to have a kind of a bucket going around and collecting the money, and it was just people. Then you take off your costume, and then people say, "Oh, we had a feeling it was you ourselves," and this, that, and the other, you know. Yeah.
Very good. So local culture was important to you growing up.
Yeah, well, look, that's all we had here. I would say I had never been abroad till I went to Switzerland. So I was 17 years of age. I'd say furthest I had been at that stage was Dublin, because we didn't have the money to get away from the area. It's only in the latter years that I've started going around Ireland. Now, the one thing we did do in the early days, we used to go to the Willie Clancy Festival, because that was a big gathering for all traditional musicians. And I started bringing my kids to the Willie Clancy. And again, that's a great week away. That's one. Like, I haven't been abroad on a foreign holiday, I'd say, in 12 years, because we've been going to the Willie Clancy with the kids. and like that's our highlight. We used to just look so forward to that, going to the Willie Clancy as well.
And just to kind of talk about maybe local natural heritage, what do you think are the most important aspects of local natural heritage in Avoca or indeed the Wicklow Mountains?
Yeah, I suppose you have, we have the mines, that's one. We have the hand weavers, which is another. We also have, there's a big interest now in this new, in the early days we used to have the local kites, the birds, the kites. So that's brought a lot of interest to the area. A lot of photographers come to Avoca. Plus it is a natural beauty in the valley itself. We actually, part of the Fla Fest, we got a drone to do a kind of a video of the local area. It's very interesting. You can see how the area was, like I would have never seen it from the early days, many photographs around, but you can now see from how beautiful the local area is. I would say as well, you would have had a lot of fishing industry being beside Arklow, and it actually was very disturbing. I worked in Arklow for a while, we were building a memorial park for the dead sailors, and this was, when was this, about 2010. They start dismantling all the trawlers, and there's not as big a fishing industry coming out of Arklow anymore. And it was kind of disturbing to see it, because it was one of the biggest employers within Arklow as well, was the fishing industry, because you had local haulers that were hauling the fish to mart, and it kind of, I think that, and then the farming industry is big in Avoca. There was a lot of big farmers here that would have employed a lot of people as well. So again, the farming has been hit. There was a local dealer, Harps, that would have dealt a lot with crop on that. I don't know whether they're still doing it, but the beet industry went. So there was a lot of, the area's got knocked a good bit as well. So and hopefully now industry can rebuild. I know that a lot of kind of pharmaceuticals moved to the area as well. There's a pharmaceutical in Rathdrum in Arklow. So I think natural history here would be the mines mostly, and the hand weavers, and the fishing industry was big.
And would you spend much time walking in kind of this upland area?
Oh yeah, well we, like our family would have, say the summers, we would have done a lot of, we've gone up, they started a new walk up in Anacor kind of forests. Also the Sean Lenihan walk, which is named after a local sergeant in Ockram. They named a walk after him, and we would have walked a good bit there. We would have gone to Avondale quite a bit. Actually spent a lot of time in Avondale. It was like, in the summer evenings, it was always beautiful to go for a walk. And it's still a highlight. My wife now would take the kids and that for a walk. And I would have been heavily involved in the local GAA and that, Avoca, and also heavily involved when we moved we were on the kind of Anacora-Ockram border. My kids would have played for Anacora as well, which is a small village right beside Ockram. And again, like all these areas are within 6 kilometres of each other, and a lot of people would know each other, but would have been a lot of pride in the local areas, if you know what I mean. And that's still the case. And yeah, a lot of I noticed that a lot of the council are helping a lot now where it comes to utilising the walks and upgrading them and that. So that's, yeah, that would be a big thing.
And if you and I were on one of these walks, what might we kind of see or hear or smell?
Yeah, look, a lot of the stuff that we, when we were on our walks, a lot of the stuff, we'd be just looking at because I work for a tree surgery company, I'd be big into local trees, what are the indigenous, the conversation is, like, where does that river, like a lot of the rivers, the meetings of the waters kind of, where did it come from? Where did it go? That would have been a big part of it. Like the Voca river flows into Arklow. You have the Avonmore and the Avonbeg. We would have done a lot of fishing there. Like I remember early days, my dad was a big man into the fishing, and we used to go between the Wooden Bridge and Ockram, where they now have the fish farms. We used to do a lot of fishing, and it was just a good recreation. Get out, clear your head. And we used to go sometimes, get up 8 o'clock, cycle. Like as I say, there wasn't many cars in those days. We'd cycle to say near the Wooden Bridge, and you'd always, on your way back, we'd always go into the golf club there, the Wooden Bridge, because from the Wooden Bridge you can walk from Ballyarter, the back road, back to Avoca, and it's kind of a rough road. It wasn't a tarmac road or anything. So yeah, that was in the early days. We used to do a lot of go to the golf course and collect golf balls, and as a form of earning a bit of money. Like, so yeah, they were great times. Like,
if you were fishing, what might you have caught?
We used to catch a little bit of brown trout and rainbow trout, mostly. The odd time we would have gone into Arklow on the pier, and you wouldn't always get much there, like, because you'd have to mostly go out to sea. But we'd get a little bit of place and that from in Arklow. I remember fishing, and again I brought my kids to it. Got them a few fishing rods and went out to the pier. Even if you didn't catch anything, it was a great day to sit around and do something, like, you know. And then maybe walk the beach. And in fairness to in Arklow, the tidy towns have, with the help of the local council, they have a walk now that goes out from the Arklow pier out towards Roadstone. So we do a bit of walking there, or maybe go down to Clugga, maybe cycle to Clugga. So yeah, brilliant. And again, you had British Bay, which wasn't far from us. We used to cycle to British Bay in the summers when we were younger. You know, if your parents were working, you say, "What are we going to do today?" "Oh, we'll get up and we'll cycle and swim." So yeah.
And so, with all that time spent outdoors, how would you kind of view the current state of maybe nature in the Wicklow Mountains?
Well, I would have spent a lot of time through my job surveying, and I noticed that there is a lot more of local, well, when I say a lot of deer. I would have spent a lot of time up in Capure for work. I spent a lot of time up in Glendalough, and I noticed there's a lot more deer. Again, you kind of, from years living in rural Ireland, you kind of know when you see the weather changing, you say, well, there's going to be a lot more deer down. So these little things you would have picked up through the years, like you'd say, right, it's going, you know, snow is coming. There's deer down crossing roads and stuff like that. Yeah, I would say as well, they've introduced the red kite to Avoca, which is associated with Avoca. I would say, yeah, it's and especially with the mines closed, there was never any kind of, you couldn't fish in Avoca River. I see people now fishing in Avoca River because there's not as much sulphur in it because it's not been mined. And in the early days, we used to notice in the village, if you looked over the bridge in Avoca, you could see it was a lot of copper in it. It was very red, and there was a lot of sulphur in the water as well. So a lot of natural fish, would you say, local fish like rainbow wouldn't be plentiful in Avoca. So you'd have to go, as I say, down to the Wooden Bridge. The Meetings of the Waters used to fish a little bit there as well. And yeah, Avoca wasn't, but it's starting to come back. You can see a little bit of greenery within the when you look over the bridge, you can see greenery, and that's a good sign that maybe it's flushing out all of the chemicals in it.
And you mentioned the reintroduction of the red kite to the area. What's the kind of significance of that, do you think?
I just think it was, as I say, it was associated with Avoca in the early days. Then they died out, and I know that some people have done some lectures on the red kite, and and it's actually attracted a lot of people into the area, because I don't know whether it's associated anywhere else in Wicklow. I'm not sure, but I know Avoca is one of the popular destinations for it, you know. And I suppose a lot of the local community, tidy towns, and I think the men's shed, their logo is the red kite. So again, I don't know much of the history of the red kite in the area, but I know it's associated with Avoca, you know.
And even growing up, or you know, in kind of contemporary Avoca, were there any kind of superstitions or folk tales around?
Yeah, the banshee. Banshee was a big part of it. I don't know whether they did it to scare you to stay in at night and not go out, you know. But I remember we used to have these tales. Like, we used to have people come to the house because, again, we used to have sessions in the house. And in the early days, rather than go to, like, youngsters weren't allowed in the pub. I remember my dad wouldn't allow us in the pub in the early days, and like, it was just frowned upon, I suppose. And again, then you would have had sessions in the home, and that's where the kids, we'd sit around listening to some of the old yarns. And there was one, and there was another one called the Black Dog. Have you seen a black dog cross the road at night? Somebody in the family might pass away, and I suppose some of these traditions, the people still to this day still think, you know, black dog crossing the road, or the banshee, if somebody heard a banshee. And we used to be always, when you'd hear, there used to be donkeys. Sean Kenny, a local man, used to breed donkeys, and sometimes donkeys used to have a high pitch. Or you'd have foxes mating, high pitch, and we used to say, "Oh, here's the banshee," and we'd head under the pillow, and you know, and it was, you're scared of your life, you know. And I remember the local hotel now is closed. It actually burned down. The Valeview Hotel, they burned down in the 80s. It's burned twice actually, and they moved all their, because they had commitments for local weddings, and they were always very busy for weddings. So they moved to the Wooden Bridge Hotel, and we all had part-time jobs. I was a barman part-time when I was doing bottles, and you know, sorting bottles, and what they call is filling the fridges and stuff like that. That was my part-time job. But at night we used to have to walk home, myself and a few mates, and maybe my mum was working in the Wooden Bridge at the time as well. And we'd walk home, and when we got to near the graveyard, because of these old yarns, we used to run as we got past the graveyard. Your heart would be in your mouth, you know. But yeah, just thinking back, like some of the things that my sister Una would be kind of a one to remind us of. She used to remember the stories she used to tell us, and we used to be afraid of our life, you know. Run past the graveyard. The manor was another. The Avoca Manor was years ago, I think it was a home for underprivileged kids and that, and it was then turned into kind of like a hostel. It's still there now. I think they have a hostel there, and they bring people, I think foreign groups from, say, Spain, Italy, and they bring them for a little bit like a cross communal or cross cultural lectures and that to it. They have bus loads come to it, so it's still heavily involved in that. Like, we used to go up and work there as well. We used to run past there because that's where they reckon the black dog used to come. So I'd say it was just to keep us in and not out roaming the roads at night, you know.
And just to come back to kind of like the local physical landscape, what do you think is the most important aspect of that?
I think if you ever see an aerial view of Avoca, the one thing that stands out is the bridge. So you can see the river as it is, and you can see the bridge coming, but just the landscape of it, your church, then, like if you look, Avoca has 1, 2, 3, 4 roads that kind of gravitate, like the 4 roads will connect some way. So you have a road that comes from Dublin through Rathdrum, and you can go a back road again, back up to Cunry, brings you back to Dublin. You can go via the Wooden Bridge, brings you back to Archaeological, brings you back to Dublin. and then you have the other road, which is the beach road. They call it the beach road. That brings you back to Arklow as well. So all those roads connect to some way between Arklow and back to Dublin. So yeah, that would be like the 4 roads that come into Avoca end up bring you either to Exeter or Dublin.
And could you tell me a little bit about any of the kind of ancient sites or archaeological sites in this area or in the broader surrounding areas?
Yeah, I think you would have, I suppose, the Holy Year Cross, kind of in the early. I think the mines. I read an article about the mines. The mines, they used to trade ore during the Roman times with Avoca. Greeks traded in Ireland as well, which until I read it, I couldn't believe it. Like, so ore was a big part of this area, and they did say in the early days that there was gold found in Avoca, but a Canadian company came in and bought out the mineral rights to Avoca. So I would say definitely the mines was a big part of it. Like ancient sites, like as well. I think they found in Greystones. They found the first ever pipes, actual playing pipes, was found up in Greystones. Up near, they were digging out. Actually, I was involved at the time. They were digging the Charlesland. Charlesland was just a big area, like an open area, fields and that. And about 5 or 6 developers bought that land, but the archaeologists had to come in first and clear off the sites, and they found the first set of pipes there. I think that was in 2000, when was that? 2010, 12 maybe, and it's documented. In this area, did they find anything? There was stuff found. They reckon there was coins. There was a couple of Roman coins found, and that's why they think, going back to the early days, that the Romans traded for ore, and it is documented. You can Google it. You can see it if you put in on Google search. You can ask a little bit of history about Avoca mines, and it brings it up. When you read the article, it references the Roman trade with the ore with Avoca. So I'm sure if it was investigated more, there would be definitely archaeological digs and that would be stuff would be found.
And you mentioned Holy Year Cross as well.
Yeah, so the Holy Year Cross was put up in the early days when some people were lost. It was in memory of the miners, and you can actually see it's a lovely site. You can oversee the whole mining valley. It's up if you're heading up past the towers, which is the mining towers, and those mining, again, it's referenced in Google. When you put the search in, it tells you the history of that. So these big stone structures were made. They used to they used to, I don't know what the right terminology, but they used to wash most of the mineral, and to get some of the copper and zinc, they used to wash it in those big towers, and they had these kind of hoppers where you used to drop down, and they used to take it away then for taking abroad. And the Canadian company bought it out, and again in 80, I think it was 80, the mines were going through a bad patch where the government had subsidised the mines to keep it open, again they just couldn't afford to keep it open because they weren't getting the better grade of ore, so they weren't getting as much out of it. But there is talk of maybe reopening, I don't know. And again, yes, they do say, a lot of people, they were trying to open up the mines, some of the openings in the mines they were going to open and let people do it, but it was just too costly for the insurance. It was going to cost too much money they were going to do tour guides to the mines, but there's talk about that coming back again. I don't know whether it'll happen, but yeah.
And on the note of kind of tourism, how would you view the kind of current state of tourism, maybe to the Wicklow Mountains? Wouldn't
be as big now as in, say, the early 80s. I remember in the early 80s, again, walking the View, they could get maybe 20 coaches a day where people were coming to the hand weavers. So they had a tour to come to Glendalough, to go from Glendalough to the mines, maybe past the mines. They'd go to the Avoca hand weavers. They'd do a tour then of maybe Arklow down the quay. They might even go then, where would it go then? Maybe down Wexford. So there was a lot of tour guides. And then we had a local, he was actually originally an Englishman, but he was an artist for Walt Disney. And he used to do the tours, draw for the tours, and do these little sketches of maybe leprechauns or some characters, local characters. And there's actually paintings archived about, and he used to draw a lot of local old men in pubs and that. And you could see the characters in it, like. And he used to draw them in Americans. It was very popular in the 80s. Nowadays it's not. I know when Ballycas's Angel was filmed in Avoca, it kind of put a resurge into the tourism. But I don't think it's got. There's still tours coming to Avoca, but it's not as popular as it was in the 80s. In the 80s it was massive, so it was.
I was actually going to ask about Ballycas's Angel. What did that do for the area?
Oh yeah, it was like I think it really put Avoca back on the map, because actually that wasn't the only. I know Liam Neeson filmed Michael Collins in Rathdrum, and there was a lot of local people here that was involved in the movie. A lot of local people here as well was involved in Braveheart. Was part of Braveheart was filmed near Glendalough and that, up in the Wicklow Mountains as well. So the film industry has been big in Avoca, and Ballycas's Angel really highlighted that. I remember coming home from work some nights, as I said, worked for Madigan's in Dublin, and I would finish late at night. By the time I cleared up and was on my way home, you could see the night scenes. You'd have to wait for the traffic lights, because they were filming some of the night scenes in Avoca, and it was just a big buzz around the area. Like, again, locals wanted to get involved. It was just lovely to see. And I remember I lived in the early days when Ballycas's Angel was filmed first. I lived in England, and I even go online and people talking about, I was in Avoca, and I went to all those sites where they filmed Ballycas's Angel. So yeah, there was a big kind of a big kind of encouragement for the local area to see the local area being filmed and that. So yeah.
And Fountain's Pub, which is.
It was originally called the Fountain,
sorry.
But they called it Fitzgerald's because Fitzgerald's was, and actually it's Kelly's that owned the pub. Benny Kelly owned the pub, and before Benny, there was the Noltys, which were local people. Sean and actually my sister-in-law was an Nolty. That was her family name. And before them, there was Totsy Byrne. He owned the Fountain when it was called the Fountain, and Totsy, his wife, was the local principal of the Avoca School. So, and he owned the pub, and there was a big team in Avoca at that time in the pub. When you used to go into the pub, they had a lot of old kind of vintage pikes, and going back to the 17 Rebellion and that. And there was a lot of old muskets and stuff like that, and some of the older, and I don't know where he got them from, but even going back to the Spanish Inquisition, and a lot of the armory that they had, like the helmets, the steel helmets that even the Vatican, you can still see that style of helmets, and that was, you could see where it came from. Some of it obviously had to do with the church,
And would the pub still be visited by maybe indigenous tourists, so Irish tourists, because of Ballycas's Angel?
Yeah, you still would. It wouldn't be as popular now, but it was it was very, very, very busy for local people going to local, because they still have this thing about local pubs, like the only thing you get in is Guinness, Yeah. Because I remember if one tour, say, one person from American especially come in and they get half a Guinness. Everybody on the coach would get a Guinness. Yeah, let's try a Guinness. But I think Irish people coming to Avoca, they just want to see where all this, where the heritage was, the hand weavers and all that, and it's still very popular. Like, it's because I suppose with social media now, it promotes areas a lot more than word of mouth. When you can go, like I say, you can go onto Google now and it gives you a rundown of the whole area. Like,
and what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that tourism will bring, or increased tourism maybe will bring to Avoca?
Well, I think the struggles that has is, I suppose, in the local area, there's not as much. There's not as much employment in the local area. In the early days, there was a lot more kind of different types of shops and stuff like that. Now you have just your local butcher, your local grocery shop, one pub. Like, there used to be 3 or 4 hotels. There's only now one hotel still survived from that. You have the Meetings of the Waters, where I think with, insurance has a lot to do with it. In the early days when we were at the Meetings of the Waters, there was a lot of dancing, a lot of music. People are afraid to do it now in case if somebody fell, there's a claim. So a lot of kind of stuff. Plus, I suppose the smoking ban, the drink driving has created there's not as much, and I suppose that's a good thing, but there's not as much in the early days when there was no drink driving. There was a lot more people congregating in the local pubs and stuff like that. So nowadays there's not as much of that.
And what kind of sites or trails or locations do you think tourists visit most in the Wicklow Mountains?
I would think Glendalough would be a big thing, because we used to have the St. Kevin's Walk. We did it regularly ourselves, like local people. But I definitely think Glendalough still attracts a lot of people. And I suppose you have a few businesses started up in Glendalough. You have the new wool mill up there as well. They have a shop that started there a few years ago. And I suppose you have Lara, you have Anamo, then you have Roundwood. There's a lot of scenery there, and there's a lot of walks. You can go up to the waterfalls in Glendalough as well. So that would be a big attraction. Avoca, again, what it has is the hand weavers and I suppose the mines, and that's what I think that we're talking about, trying to open up the mines if they could do it in such a way, because only recently they blocked up some of the what they call the air vents, because they were getting too dangerous. And actually on the website you can see them warning people not to get into these air holes, and they've closed them up because it is too dangerous, because I remember my dad talking in the early days, whenever they used to have pumps for pumping the water out, and when the pumps used to break down, or he said the water would just up to their waist within minutes, and they'd have to evacuate the mine. Like, so yeah, I'd say that's the attraction really for the Avoca mines. You can still go to the Holy Year Cross. A lot of people walk to that. Yeah, I think the hand weavers would be the biggest attraction for the minute. Yeah.
And obviously you mentioned the mines and potentially reopening and the hand weavers as well. What role do you think the Avoca kind of upland community can play in developing tourism?
Well, I definitely think if they could do a tour, if they could open up some sort of like you've got the Meetings of the Waters, which is going back to Thomas More's time. Definitely pump a bit of money into upgrading because you have a beauty there, a natural beauty. It should be really encouraged. I think as well, start maybe replenishing the rivers with local fish. Maybe that would attract people coming in to do maybe a tour, and you could do a bit of fishing. Some sort of a museum, mining museum. because it's something that really is craved for this area. They don't really have that that can show. Like I remember my father giving me little tools to do with what they had in the mines for breaking rock, and some of the handmade tools as well. And there was a forge in Avoca as well. Like maybe bring back something like a forge and a blacksmith, and you know, there was farriers in Avoca as well. Like over near the White Bridge, maybe get a couple of like up in Greenland they have a farrier museum, something for the area that would show some of the local history, you know.
And would you have a favourite site in the Wicklow Mountains?
I love going up to Conry, I have to say. I just think up to the Motti Stone and that, the walk there is lovely. And if you walk along Tiggeroni, just some lovely sites up there. When you come down from Tiggeroni, the old road that brings you back to the mining road, which is the White Bridge there, again, that brings you to the meetings, the waters. Like I used to love, we used to walk from there on a Sunday afternoon when we go to Mass. On the way home from Mass, you go home for lunch, and then we'd say, right, we'll meet at the meetings of the waters. And you used to walk along that. It's a 2 kilometre or 2 mile walk. I don't know why, maybe 3 kilometres. And that was a great walk. You walk to the meetings, you'd sit, have your lunch, maybe the meetings, and listen to traditional music. Or there used to be bands in the 80s. They'd bring bands to perform open air, and then you'd walk back home, and it was a great day. Like you couldn't wait for the weekend to come. Yeah.
And how much would you consider yourself to be from the Wicklow Mountains? What significance does that hold for you?
Well, I suppose going back to history, it has a lot to do with the area. You know, Wicklow is associated with the Wicklow Mountains, and I think people used to say you could go to the Wicklow Mountains, or you could go to Conry, say to the Motti Stone. You could see the coast of Wales on a good clear day. You used to see it. I just think if you drive from, say, Avoca to Glendalough and head up the gap, as they call it, the Wicklow Gap, I mean, it's a thing of beauty. It's really, and actually in Wexford, it's something they could do in Wicklow. They have a natural water treatment system in Blackstairs Mountain, and what it is the water that comes down the Blackstairs Mountain, they utilised. They put it into a natural kind of gravity fed. So the water comes down the mountain. It has such pressure on it that it flows naturally up to the water treatment plant that they have in the Blackstairs Mountain, up near Rathneor. And the Wicklow Mountains, I suppose you have Thurlock Hill there, but when there's heavy rain, there's a natural flow of water that's not utilised. I think it could be utilised so much. You could have so much natural water that you wouldn't need to be chlorinating a lot of the water that we have in local areas. Like Archaeological in particular has a bad water system, where I think if they were to trap that water, they would have a natural resource there, you know.
And do you think there's a strong kind of sense of place identity in Avoca?
Yeah, definitely. Avoca, like, no matter where you go in the world, I've said to people, where are you from? Avoca. Avoca has a huge history and a huge name, because it's beautiful. Was one, like, it's a local beauty. It's a natural beauty that hasn't been really tampered with that much, and it's just been associated with the hand weavers and stuff like that. Like, it just has that history, you know. And people, when you say you're from Avoca, some other areas, if you say are from that area, they probably wouldn't know the name. But Avoca, most people, you can be guaranteed. If you go to America and you tell people where you're from, they'll know where Avoca is, you know.
And what do you think is the best thing about living in an upland area?
I just think it's just simple life, you know. There's no expectations. just natural kind of simple life, simple things. Like I've lived in cities. You just seem to be, it's like a rat race. You seem to be constantly work, sleep, work. You know, I think in an area like Avoca or any rural area, it's a much more simpler thing. And I've seen a documentary as well, a TEDx talk with Brendan Begley, the musician from Kerry. And I kind of related to him in a big way, where he was looking for planning permission to build a house locally, and they weren't given planning to rural local people. They were trying to kind of make some of the town areas bigger, and he thought, well, eventually in another 50 years, rural Ireland, there will be no rural Ireland if they encourage this kind of sporadic development. I know there has to be apartments, I know there has to be housing, but the one thing that was associated with local areas is those small local independent houses built in rural Ireland, spread out rather than in a big kind of development. I just felt I could relate to what he was talking about. He said in 50 years we will not have rural Ireland. And one thing that rural Ireland had going for it was the beauty. And that's something I think that people need to sit back and look at. And I felt that they brought in this kind of urban kind of ethos where they were kind of had this affordable housing, and I get that they were trying to make it affordable, but when you are encouraging mass development, you won't have this in 50 years. You won't have this local beauty anymore. There'll be just a mass of houses, and you know. And I know people that say, "Oh, well, it's easy for you to say that." You know, people need to be able to live. But I think in the early days in Ireland, I don't know what it is, whether it's to do with the famine, but people had a patch of land or had a little house, and they associate that's their little patch of land, and that's their little, and that is rural Ireland. I think having that. I know I worked in Switzerland, and the big thing in Switzerland, in they're trying to hold on to that as well. But in the cities, they had this kind of culture where with smaller families. Naturally, we had bigger families in the early days, and when you got to 18, 19, you were living in an apartment, say in the city with your family. When you got to 18, 19, you moved into your own apartment. I think in rural Ireland, you lived with your family. That was your kind of, you never wanted to move away from your family. So with employment issues and all that, families did move away, and then you try to get back to your local, some stayed away, but when you did get back, you wanted to be close to your family. You know, it's that family knit community thing that I thought, you know, we don't want to lose that. And I would say if you even go to Clare, they have the same, you know, they don't want to lose that natural beauty, like.
And if you could change one thing about the area, what might that be?
I just think, like, go back to the early days where we had, you know, just simple things like getting out Sunday mornings. I just think the church got a big hit with all these other things that went on with the church. I think in the early days where the youth clubs and all that, I just think introduce maybe community orientated stuff like youth clubs and that, because it was a much simpler thing, maybe camping trips and stuff like that. I just think with the way things have gone now, 21st century technology and all that, we've lost that identity, you know. I just think social media is a good thing, but there again it can be, a lot of people are using the phones. I'm to be blamed for that as well. I use it quite a bit, but I just think in the early days we used to be out till 8 or 9 o'clock in the evenings, and I just think they did start up a scouts club here in the village. I know they have the active retirement. all those things are to be encouraged and to be nourished. You know, to nourish that type of thing. Like I think local areas, they the likes of the men's shed, when you get to an age like retirement age, there has to be something for people. There's always, whether you're a child or whether you're retired, just for the local areas, to encourage that kind of thing. Now, I would say in Avoca they're very community based. The hall here was taken over. I'm involved in the hall. I'm chairperson of the local Avoca Community Hall, and as an area I would say they're very proactive in that side of things. But I just think the village itself needs kind of needs some sort of a facelift as well. Maybe a museum, something like that. Something to encourage more people to come into the area.
And just in closing then, what does it mean to you to be from Avoca?
Well, everything, because I knew, like my grandfather coming from the north, marrying a local lady, starting a new life, starting a family. We are heavily associated with Avoca as a family. I would say any family in the area, like going back early days, we would be highly kind of proud of being involved. And most of the family names here, Canavan's like Kathleen that actually works in the community here in the hall. Kathleen, I would have been brought up with Kathleen's family. We're still involved, if you know what I mean. Like I'm involved in the hall here. Kathleen's family, her parents were musicians, and it's not just the music, but GAA. A lot of my family would have played GAA, and it's just about keeping those, how would you say, good points about the area, keeping them there, keeping everybody involved, the next generation. And I do say to my kids, like, I tell them stories about the area. They live in Auckland, but they come to Avoca, we do the music. And it's to keep that history, that it moves to the next generation and it's never forgotten. Because we don't know what it's going to be like in 100 years' time. We don't know what rural Ireland's going to be like. But I love to look back and read stuff about rural Ireland 100 years ago. What was it like? And as I say, simple little story my dad telling me about him getting these tweed suits, you could buy them for 20 pence or whatever it was, 2 shillings or whatever it was. Just to hear that, and little things like, I remember a guy saying in the pub one night, talking about buying a car. Oh, in the early days you didn't have to get a car loan. We used to save the money and buy our first car. And how things have changed. You know, the value for money isn't there anymore. So everybody has to nearly get a mortgage. Everybody has to get a car loan. And college, kids going to college, that's another thing that they need to encourage. I think the point system for the Leaving Cert is actually pushing people to go abroad. And that's something to have to look at. Because I have kids that are doing their Leaving Cert, or have done it, that we're waiting for their results. They might have to go abroad. They mightn't be able to. Whatever they want to do in life. And I think to encourage people not to, we're sending our best people abroad. I had to do it myself. I think that's something that needs to be looked at. There's something that we're trying to do this year in the company that I work for. We're going to encourage apprenticeships, because it's something that we've lost. In the early days, in the 80s, not everybody was school orientated. They encouraged, I thought it was a good thing, encouraged apprenticeships. You didn't have to do your Leaving Cert. I know it's a must now for people to go to college, but I think what they need to look at is, for those people that are doing their Leaving Cert, but they know they're not going to get those top grades, is to encourage them. So what we're thinking about doing is to go to local schools here. We've got involved with a government body that is doing Aberystwyth apprenticeships. So we're going to encourage that and go into the local schools and join TY and then Leaving Cert year and say, look, this is another avenue you can go, and encourage that within Ireland, because that's another thing which is a big part of Wicklow, is the forestry industry. Cuilche and that. Cuilche are heavily involved with a lot of these walks, so that's something that has to be encouraged, you know.
And is there anything else that you'd like to add to the record that we haven't previously talked about?
No, I just CUPHAT I thought was a brilliant thing. The day we came down because of it being connected with the music, but when we seen everything that was displayed, the presentation, I just was blown away, and I said, this is a great thing. This has to be encouraged throughout. And I know, again, we spoke about being involved, influences in music, Scots, Irish, Welsh. I know CUPHAT is very heavily involved with the. I just think this is to be encouraged, because at some stage all of these countries are connected and the heritage needs to be kept. And I know that in the near future, a big part of what we want to do as a cultist group, I want to go to the French Celtic Festival. It's something that I've always wanted to do, because from feedback from local people that have gone abroad to France, you can see all those heritage and cultures where they're all connected some way, and that's something I want to do. Yeah, so yeah.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much, Lara.
No, thank you. I hope it could help.
And I'll just stop the recording now.
Yeah.